I'm not leaving here without my wife. Hospital told me it was the COVID protocol, but I saw murder behind those walls. Doctors with cold hearts, no eyes to see, not a hospital, a killing machine. I watched them lie with every breath, dressed in scrubs but dealing death. Said she was terminal, told her she was gonna die, but I said hell no, she ain't dying today. 'Cause I came for my wife with fire in my veins. You won't bury her to boost your game. I know the drugs, I know the game, and I won't play while you light the flame. You call it care, I call it war, and I'm kicking down your ICU door. This is love, this is life, and I came for my wife. They'd locked her in like a damn disease. No priest, no prayer, no right to speak. Each day I asked, each day denied, while my girl fought alone inside. 26 hours in the ER chair, no treatment, no food, just cold dead air. And when they found out, she said no shot. That's the moment, merciful God. But I came for my wife, I won't back down. You don't get to play God in this town. She ain't your number, she's not your pet. You won't drug her life and walk away. I've seen death, I've worked the floor, I know your lies, I know what for. You won't own her final breath. I came to fight, not to witness death. That doctor walked in, didn't check a thing, just shook her hand like death had wings. Said you're unvaxxed, you're gonna die, but she still had fire in her eyes. He offered poison with a cross to bear, said take this drug, you will die in there. She made a deal to get her priest, swallow glass just to find her peace. We wrote the letters, called the law, brought 6 cops to that ICU hall. I dropped SB Pipe 7-2 on their desk, said you've done enough, now let her rest. Door swung open like heaven knew it was time for the fight to break straight through. I took her hand, packed the gear, and rolled her out while death drew near. 'Cause I came for my wife, and I brought her home. We've got grit and a tank of hope. They tried to run her out of breath, let us pass the hallway of death. But love don't quit, and truth don't die, and grace don't bow to a bureaucrat's lie.
All right. Thank you, Heidi Bond, for that great song. I wasn't going to play that today. I wasn't going to play it, but I want everybody to know, first off and foremost, right this second, today when we were on our X Spaces and we were talking about all of our wins and our memorial wall and all this stuff, um, our website was hacked. Our website was hacked. And so if you're trying to, our web company is restoring it now. They are on top of it. We were on top of it. Thank God Donna saw it right away and alerted everyone. But that made me mad. That made me mad because what you just watched there in that 5 minutes of video, we lived that. We lived that. My husband was prosecuted in Texas for basically saving my life. Those police that you saw in that video, these police right here, they were not there to help us. They were there to keep me in the hospital. They were there to help the hospital keep me a prisoner, basically. And we had to get a senator involved. We had to get Colonel Allen West involved. We had to get a lawyer involved in just to get through that. That we had a 6 hour standoff. They were trying to lure my husband into the hallway to get him out of that room, and my daughter was in the hallway. She got stuck in the hallway and she was taking video and she was taking pictures, and I told the police time and time again that I wanted to go home, that I didn't feel safe there, that they were going to murder me there. And so here's my so this is so I played it because I started thinking, this mission isn't like something that Huckleberry and I, when we got married years ago, said, "Hey, let's start a nonprofit that pokes the government and all the big pharma and everything in the eye." No, we were yanked. We like to say all of our love for authority and our respect for authority, and my husband, he had been a military officer, as you saw. He was a registered nurse in an ER. Um, he he checked all the boxes. He was a solid, outstanding citizen who always followed the rules and had great respect for law enforcement in every aspect. We were involved in local politics, and I like to say during the last 5 years, especially during that experience, we had our rose-colored glasses ripped off of our faces the hard way, and that was me almost ending in death. We knew I wasn't terminal. We knew I wasn't going to die. My husband will talk about that in a little bit. But I played that video just so people will, because I think I needed to be reminded, and I needed people to be reminded that this was real life for us. We the survivors have scars too, and but when we and he's going to talk about what it took to save me, but he didn't know he was going to talk about that, but he's going to talk about it now. um, when um, when we were still in the throes of was I going to live or die, because you remember I was on 60 liters of oxygen when he took me out of there, 60 liters, and he could only get me to I think 2025 at home, and he had to titrate me down. We kept thinking to ourselves the amount of money it costs us to save my life and the amount of experience he needed. Not just anybody could have done it. He had that experience, the military experience and the registered emergency nurse experience. Um, we kept thinking, well, he was trying to save me. What if people didn't have the money to save their loved one? What about all the people who don't have um, the experience, the nurse at home, the just all these different things, and what are they going to do? And we said then that we were going to start some kind of a thing to help people, because we couldn't imagine people being murdered just because they couldn't afford to live. Just, I mean, people would bring us things and they would say, here, Here's a oxygen concentrator. My mom died before she could use it. Here's a they would, and everything that somebody brought to us, it was because somebody didn't make it and they had it. And they would, everyone, and you remember this, Huckleberry, every one of those people when they dropped it off would say to me, don't, if you live, don't forget that somebody died. Don't forget somebody died. And I said, I will never forget this mission. So I don't know who hacked our site. I don't know why. I know why they hacked our site, because we're over the target. This crime victim week and all of us coming together, hospice people, the brain death group, the shot group, the protocol group, all of us coming together as one have made us a force to be reckoned with. And now they've they've just pissed me off. Now they've just pissed me off. I was tired this morning. I told a lot of you guys, like I'm, we've been working all week, and since February, really, to put this together. I'm not tired anymore. Now I'm double mad. I'm like even more in the fight. I don't know why anybody would watch anything that Betrayal Project USA does, or Marsha's group, or any of the groups that have pulled together, and think those people are people that we can stop. I just don't know why. Like, we have been the ones that have been consistently unstoppable, and we will not stop. There's nothing somebody can do that will stop me. And so I wanted to start with that message of, because people are going to go to our site. You're not going to see what you're used to seeing, and but it'll be restored soon. And see, Laura Chapman, today would have been our eighth wedding anniversary. Justice for Chappie. That's Laura's Twitter account. And Lisa's is Justice for Earl. Lisa's husband also killed. See, I know, we know these people. We know these faces that didn't make it. This isn't something we would just give up because somebody hacks our site. We'll build new if we had to. Anyway, so today is about survivors. It's about crimes they tried to bury. How apropos when they tried to take down our site. Yeah, Donna's right. I'm pull that in there. They just stoked the fire. They don't know us. They stoked the fire. People's loved ones are dead. They're not just gonna go, okay, I'll stop fighting for my husband or my brother or my mother or I'm just gonna stop talking about it. Okay, so crimes they tried to bury. Not everybody feels like they survived serial killers. I do understand that. I felt that way. But we are going to talk about a few things. We're going to talk about survivor guilt. That's a thing. It's a thing. Not everybody. A lot of our survivors actually, their loved one didn't make it. But there is such a thing as survivor guilt. We're going to talk about why it's still happening, how to protect your loved. Well, I'm on fire, guys. Just so you know, I'm on fire today now. We're going to talk about making the most of second chances. And I want to talk about survivors as evidence, right? And then beyond the mission and how to advocate. Hopefully Laura Bartlett will join us, and Patty Giuliano is going to join us after her appointment. So, but one of the things I want to start with, I do want to remind everybody, as soon as you can scan here, but and go right to the proclamation. But I would like everybody to sign the proclamation and I'll go through this a little bit later too. The proclamation to formally recognize us as medical crime victims. I'm going to talk a little bit about, if you were on our spaces, you heard me talk about it a little bit, about a success that we had in Fresno with regard to Crime Victim Rights Week and being recognized. But But I want to go to Cara. I'm going to go to you because I saw your tears, and I know you are a, which I can't even imagine, but you are a hospice survivor, and you and I share kind of similar. There's a lot of similarities. Um, just kind of people say like, they probably can understand how you can be on hospice and be a survivor. Like,
Right.
happen.
Yeah, they can't wrap their brains around that, their heads around it, and it was 10 years ago. It's been 10 years ago since they put me on hospice, and they did try to murder me, and they even wrote it down in my medical records. They planned it, and they wrote it down. That's the mind for me, the mind-blowing part of it. They knew what they were doing, and they planned it. They planned my cremation, and they even wrote down that they did not contact my son, and that they did not contact my, you know, uh, my boyfriend, my husband, my partner,
Mhm.
and who had medical power of attorney and power of attorney of me. They did it while what they did write down, along with the name and phone number of the crematory, was the fact that they were out of town at the moment, and they had their own private hospice ambulance come and take me out of my home and take me to their unit after, and they wrote this down too, they overdosed me, and I was unresponsive. So how could I fight back? How could I say no? And then that's where I told him, hey, they're trying to kill me. You know, you've got to get me out of here. And that was I was coming up on my second recertification time, another 6 months.
Mhm.
At the end of the second 6 months, I'd been on hospice for a year. And so it was time to recertify me for another 6 months. So just kill me, so they didn't have to. And it didn't work because, he took me home. And then the next thing I know, I'm on another hospice agent. I'm with another hospice agency, and then overdosed again. And I looked up, and with Marsha's help and with her knowledge and everything and everyone else, the amount of drugs that they had me on was insane. It's literally enough to kill a horse. And I was 110 pounds, 120 pounds at the most at the time. And they were giving me enough drugs that if you gave that amount of medication or opioids, morphine, to a horse, it would kill a horse. And it's a good thing I was not a very obedient patient. I was not particularly obedient or uh, I could be, they term me combative at times, disagreeable. I I hid medication, I spit it out, I tumped it over, I did things like that, and you'd think that would be a clue to them that she doesn't want this, right? And it did not stop them. In fact, they came in, my husband he came in from work one day early and caught them having our mortal and pestle, and they were grinding up my Dilaudid pills in it and mixing it with water and forcing it down my throat while I was unresponsive. And there was 2 nurses and a caregiver, actually 3 people. And he, lost it. And they just stopped. They ran out of the apartment.
Wow.
And of course, there's nothing you can do because it's not a criminal matter. We found out it's a health care matter, you know? So it's insane.
Let me ask
It's
you this. So
insane.
you were in home hospice. I see you taking a drink, Mick, so I won't ask you right away. But no, okay. You or Jenny or Huckleberry, you all three y'all nurses, because Patty ain't on. Dr. Patty ain't on. So when Kara says it's not a criminal matter, like let's say in the facility that you're in, you were forcing down pills down a patient's throat like they were a cat, like they were the family cat, like open up and let me shove a pill down your throat they didn't want. What would happen to you as a nurse?
I can't imagine. I would be called on the carpet. I mean, first of all, you don't, hold the nose, shove it in the mouth. Stroke the throat. This is ridiculousness. When you were saying that, I know I was on mute, but I was like saying, you've got to be kidding me with that. I would never as a nurse, whether I was working in hospice, working in the ICU, it doesn't matter. I worked home health. I worked home infusion. I would never walk into somebody's house and start grinding down their pills and putting that and giving that to them without a thorough and complete assessment of their pain and the need to do so. And if there's that big of a need that you're grinding somebody's pills down because they can't swallow that, then we've got a whole different issue. It wasn't even that way with you. It sounds like it is criminal. It is criminal.
That's not what the district
Mick is
attorney
right.
or the police said.
Mick is right. It is criminal. And whoever told you it's not criminal, they misinformed you. And actually they misinformed you because we as nurses are taught and we're told to force a treatment on somebody against their will is assault and battery.
Right. The Attorney General's office said that it was not.
The Attorney General didn't want to bother.
Texas.
They didn't want to bother because they didn't think he'd win.
That's what it is. That's all it is. They didn't want to get involved.
Industry has great attorneys. That's what it was.
But they wrote it down in my medical records. They even wrote it down in my medical records. And I have a copy of those records.
They were CYA all over the place.
And Marcia has seen those records where they wrote it down that they did that.
So
and they wrote down the 30 minutes before that I was in no pain.
Were you able to verbalize?
No.
Were you able to verbalize at that time?
I honestly don't remember. I honestly do not remember. I could have, because there were many times I remember saying no to many things. And the next thing I knew, I'm waking up. So there were many times.
Do you mind me asking what the reason you were on hospice? What was their
muscular dystrophy? I was diagnosed. I had moved from Houston up to Dallas. And in 2012, I had a muscle biopsy done at Herman Memorial Medical Center in the medical center downtown in Houston. And the doctor called me and said that it came back that I have muscular dystrophy. I was tested for myotonic dystrophy and I was tested for myasthenia gravis. I never can pronounce that correctly. And they both came back negative. No one in my family has ever had muscular dystrophy of any type. And then I moved to Dallas and they just picked that diagnosis up and ran with it. And then I started getting weaker. I started having problems and they kept putting me on pain medication, because I was already on disability for other, back issues and, epilepsy. And then they turned around and said, well, it was due to my muscular dystrophy and I was in the later stages. to prepare. I had less than 6 months to live. And of course, I was devastated and heartbroken. And I
when was
believed
it
them.
that you were put on hospice?
January of 2016 until
16.
June 7th of
Wow.
2018.
And
And
10
2
years
years.
later, 10 years
two and a
later,
half
she's
years,
still
2.5
alive.
years. And then in 2020, I finally was getting back, getting strength back, able to walk again and everything else. And I went and saw a new neurologist, and he read my muscle biopsy report, and he said, "I'm so sorry, but this is not indicative of someone misread this. You do not have muscular dystrophy."
But you didn't.
Wow. So
So
you were
they,
misdiagnosed?
yes, they put me on hospice for a disease I apparently never even had.
Wow.
Whoa.
And so the statute of limitations had run out. I can't sue anybody.
Mm.
There's no justice for me. Just
But
like
Kara,
so many others.
I want you to tell them the medication that they put you on.
Which one? I mean, they
Yeah.
had me on 3 milliliters of Roxanol sublingual every hour. They had me on
Morphine.
they had 2 fentanyl patches on my chest wall, 100 micrograms. They had me on 20 milligrams of liquid methadone. They had me on Dilaudid. They had me on 240 milligrams every 8 hours of MS Contin extended release. They had me on Ambien.
Wow.
They had me on Vistaril. They had me on
Haldol.
Seroquel. They had me on Haldol. They had me on
Oh.
it's a long litany. They had me on, I think it was 2,000 or 2,500 milligrams of Keppra every 8 hours. They had me on Mirapex. They had me on Zoloft, all at the same time. It was insane, enough to kill a horse. And they also had me on, I forget the name of it. It's another opioid. Maybe Marcia can remember which one it was.
I'm
But
sorry,
that
Kara.
should be enough.
I'm having difficulty breathing just you telling me all of those
That's-
medications.
Yeah.
My respirations are depressed. So they were doing, and forgive me, I'm sorry. They were doing all of this out of your home, or
Yes,
they
ma'am.
were, wow. Were they
Mhm.
coming in and
Yes,
providing
ma'am.
this, or they just,
Yes, yes,
wow.
ma'am.
And they
And
never,
they would even have the caregivers, they would tell the caregivers who were not trained to give me those medicines if I didn't take them, to keep an eye on me. And they had a comfort kit, which was actually a kill kit. And they told my friends and my loved ones that if I was in any distress, to just go ahead. It was pre-dosed, to go ahead and give me that medication.
Wow.
Go ahead and give me what's in that box. It was okay. And they told the caregivers to give me that medication. And I still have that box. You better believe I do.
How was that
I
allowed
still
to
do.
happen? Like, how was that allowed to happen where you had caregivers who weren't qualified to give you those medications in the first place?
They were not qualified. If they had given me that, I would not be here today.
that is such a violation.
Yes, it
I
is.
am my mother just recently passed away, and I had put her on hospice, and I had, at that time when she needed, medication, she was in a lot of pain. They gave it to me and I controlled it. Now, as a nurse, I was well aware, but I can remember I couldn't have that medication because there were times where I had to have a sitter and they weren't
Right.
qualified, and they were like, look, you got to lock that medication up because You know,
Mhm.
there were people who there were sticky fingers sometimes.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, people,
Yeah.
but it does happen.
Yeah.
Yes,
I'm
it
not trying to be
does.
and they were like, they are not qualified. They should not be touching those medications. So that again is another criminal act. If they're just telling people who are in the home,
Mhm.
hey, anybody can access the comfort kit.
Mhm.
This
They
is
had it sitting
insanity.
right there. They had it sitting right there on top of my mini fridge, that I had in my bedroom. He had gotten me a mini fridge because I couldn't go to the refrigerator anymore and they weren't feeding me, when he was at work. So he put a mini fridge in my bedroom with snacks, so that my caregivers, it was easily accessed. And, you know, he did everything in his power, but he couldn't be there 24/7. He had to work.
You know what's interesting, and I want to kind of talk about this. Um, so, and it struck me that it's true across the board. When Jenny was talking on Thursday night about the nurse who whispered in her ear, "You have to breathe," and she was like, "I could do that." So Huckleberry and I often say, well, he says it all the time, that all all of the survivors that we encounter have one thing in common. Something interrupted the plan. Something
Mhm,
interrupted the standard of care that they were intending to do. Either
mhm,
something or somebody. And I
mhm,
know for like in our case, let's it was Huckleberry.
mhm,
Huckleberry came in and he interrupted their care. For Jenny, it was the nurse, but before he came in, there was a nurse, a male nurse, who would come in every 15 minutes to my room, and he
mhm,
took me off the BiPAP, and he said, I'm going to put you back on the rebreather. And he said,
mhm,
"You'll be okay." He said, "You're going to live. You're going to live." He would come in,
mhm,
"You're going to make it. You're going to make." Everybody else, it was, "You're going to die. You can't be saved." But he was
right.
like, "You're going to live." And he said, "I don't
Mhm,
want you to listen to those machines. I'm going to turn you away from those machines so you're
mhm,
not focused on them. Listen to your body. You're going to make it." And he was so positive, and he came in every 15 minutes, just like he said he would. And I titrated a little bit and got off that BiPAP and onto the rebreather. And the doctor just dang near had a heart attack when he saw me off of that BiPAP. He tried everything he could to get me back on it, and I wouldn't. And that was a few days before, I don't know, maybe 3 days before Huckleberry came in. And but when um so that was like the first intervention, and the second one was the last night I was there. The nurse, her name was Grace. Her name.
mhm,
So just to set the stage, y'all, the day before Huckleberry came in, like a Huckleberry would, um, and the way he came in looking like that, um, he he came with a some legislation in Texas, that never left alone legislation. He tried to get the police to do their their job basically, and he called them and wanted them to wonder if we've got that. We probably don't. I don't have it queued up, but he called 911 because he called me first, and said, "Honey, tell him you want me in there because they were not letting me in, and that's the law." And I said, "I want you in here."
right.
And he called 911. They sent officers down. He asked for the sheriff, but they sent police officers, and he asked for the sheriff because the sheriff is responsible for protecting your rights. But um, ultimately, they wouldn't let him in. They wouldn't enforce the law, and so he sent them in. He asked them if they would do a welfare check, and he sent one officer did put the garb on and stood at the door. I say like a coward because I told him when he said your husband wanted me to do well, first they told him she's in a hospital, she's fine. And he was like, I wouldn't ask you to do a welfare check if she were fine. She's not fine. And this is day 11 that I'm in there. And I had been abused. I hadn't had food for 12 days. I didn't have water for 7 days. I accidentally got water because somebody didn't know. But all sorts of abuse was going on. So he said, I would not ask you to do a welfare check if she was fine. So they do a welfare check, and I said to the police officer, I said, he asked me, I told him everything that was going on. I told them, if I stay here, they're going to murder me. Those were the words I used. I said, they're going to murder me. And the police officer, this is very key, let the floor nurse, the abusive floor nurse, William Fripp, in the room. And he was standing on the other side of the bed as I was speaking to the police officer, and he was shaking his head like I was nuts. And when he walked out, he just grinned as he walked out. And I said, and I thought, man, they're going to kill me tonight. They are going to, please God, don't let me, I stayed, I was just like, all I had was my faith. I was like, please don't let them kill me. I can make it out of here if you just don't let them kill me. And
Thank God they didn't.
I stayed awake all night long because I was so afraid. But God sent me the nicest nurse. Grace was so nice. She was a little Filipino nurse, hardworking like you wouldn't believe. And her patient care tech was sweet. Her name was Justice. So Grace and Justice took care of me that night. And they took good care of me. And Justice saw that that night that there was lotion that my daughter had brought days before, and she'd put ivermectin in it, right? So, but they put everything out of your reach. And Justice saw that. She was like, "Well, Miss Gail," she said, your feet and your legs, because my legs were turning gray. I hadn't been out of the bed in 12 days. She said, "They look very dry. Do you want me to put some of this lotion on your feet?" I was like, oh my gosh, would you? So she was like, just pretend you're at a spa. And she rubbed it in my feet and my legs. And then she did that twice. And she was like, and she picked up these drinks that my daughter had brought me, Hydra shots. They're to help you with your oxygen, right? And she was like, well, these look like they would help you. What are they doing over here? I said, I don't know. I would love one. And she gave me 2 of them, and my oxygen started to kind of improve a little bit. She didn't know it was her first day on the job, right? So she's just like sweet as pie and doesn't know how to do anything else. And so I always say God sent me grace and justice the night before my husband came in. And then that morning, the nurse walks in and she's like, hi, I'm Faith. And she was kind of telling me some of the things that were going to happen that day. And my husband had just called me because the officer didn't do anything. He said to me, we don't have a protocol for this. And he left me there. And I thought I was going to die. And he never went, I didn't know this at the time, but he never went back and told my husband what I said. And so my husband, at the time, his name was just Brad, but then he became Huckleberry after he stormed the ICU. So he calls me and he said, I'm going to come, they gave you a terminal diagnosis. They told you were going to die. I'm going to come and take you out home hospice. But only I'm going to save your life. If I get in, do you want to go? Because didn't pay for him to come. I said, oh yeah, I'm going to be murdered if I stay here, I'm dead. But I don't know how you're going to get in. You got to, badge in or buzz in to the ICU. And I said, but if you get in, I'm going to go home with you. And so, so Faith comes in, and right after he calls me, Faith comes in and introduces herself as the day nurse, and I said, "Oh, I'm going home today," and she was like, "Oh, I don't think so." She was like, she didn't mean it mean, but she was like, "I don't think they're going to. No, I don't think so. I don't think the doctor's going to release you." And I was like, "Oh, I'm going home." And then like an hour later, here comes Huckleberry. God made a way, and people are like, "Why do you always talk about God in your story?" Because God made a way. God made a way, and God saved the day. But God, when Huckleberry got there, that old security guard guy who was always trying to block them, he was not sitting at his desk. There was some other kid there, and he was in the bathroom or whatever. And Huckleberry he dropped those papers off, boom, right on the desk. The letter from our lawyer, the cease and desist, tell me if I get anything wrong, Huckleberry, and put that in the SB 572 bill that Senator Bob Hall gave him. And he said, I'm going to get my wife. And the kid was like, "Okay, sir." And he gets on the elevator, and that little security guard came around the corner, saw him getting on the elevator, going up to the floor, and it was right up and in. And those ICU doors were wide open that day. They were wide open. And he was in my room so fast, so fast. And when he got in my room, I'm going to let him tell you what he found. But the reason you see him wearing that little bag, he grabbed one of those bags behind him there, the little where you put the linens, is because they chased him in there. He had worn his mask that said "Worn by force, not fear." I mean, he came in trolling. But when he walked in, I said, "There's my Huckleberry," because he just barged in my room and he said, "Honey, I'm here." And I was like, "There's my Huckleberry." But he had on his little, they always made an issue about him and his PPE. So he had on his little gloves that were too tight that he grabbed from the inside the room, and his mask and his shirt. But then they were like, "Well, you're not wearing a gown." So he grabbed one of those bags and put his head and his arms through it and said, "Problem solved." This is by far my favorite picture of Huckleberry ever. Like, I will frame this sucker. This is my favorite picture of him. But why don't you describe, especially since there's other nurses on here and nurses listening, what you found when you walked in that room and what you thought as a nurse? You may speak, Huckleberry. No, I'm just kidding.
Thank you, sire. So just a couple things. Bless the butt. Sorry, nurse training. So God was the whole reason all this happened. I'm no hero. I'm no saint. I did not know what was going on. Everything that was happening in the hospital made no sense to me whatsoever. As a trained medical, I'll call myself a trained medical professional. Okay, and there's a difference between being a nurse and a doctor and being a trained medical professional. And anybody can take the title, but being a medical professional means it's a way of being, it's a way of acting, it's a way of carrying yourself. And not all doctors, not all nurses, not all people working in healthcare are medical professionals. I'll just say that first and foremost. So we were sick at the same time. I was sick at home. We had talked about where to go in the event that one of us worsened. We had been to seminars. We knew what was happening outside the four walls of our house, and we were trying to prepare ourselves. God gave us the ability to listen with our ears and see with our eyes, and we knew what was going on. And I was in one of my other previous lives in the military, I was a unit nuclear biological chemical warfare officer because of the job that I had that I was assigned to. And so I was trained in the art of warfare. And everything that I was hearing and learning about this so-called COVID didn't make sense to me from the perspective of a nurse who was trained in pathophysiology, understood how the body systems worked, how the body protects itself from outside agents, and nothing made sense to me. The whole thing, as a professionally trained person, made no sense to me, and so I was relying on the skills that God had given me, that He had led me down certain paths, and I had acquired a set of skills that He asked me to use. And as I was at home recuperating, all the therapies that the Dr. Gang Quach was his name, come to find out he was a gastroenterologist practicing critical care medicine in a hospital that he wasn't trained to do. He wasn't trained to be a critical care doctor. I had been trained as a critical care nurse in the emergency room. Emergency room nurses and critical care nurses are all critical care. They're specialized in critical care treatment. This doctor was a gastroenterologist, which he studied the workings of the intestines from the mouth to where it comes out. He had no clue about critical care medicine. And all of his things that he wanted us to do, none of them made sense whatsoever. And so I knew as I was trying to recover, I knew I had to get in there and see my wife, because as a medical professional, as a nurse, you assess constantly. An assessment requires the 5 senses: look, listen, smell, taste, touch. Okay. You can't perform an assessment if one of those is missing. And so I could not see my wife, and I had to go off what I could hear on the phone. And they had so much oxygen going into her that she was very muffled, and you would think her voice was weak. But when I asked her to take the mask off, her voice was very strong. And so I could tell by my abilities to assess that what the doctor was telling me wasn't correct. And so I knew I had to get in there and do my own assessment. The first thing I did was I got our priest. I was born and raised Catholic. My father sold cemetery property for a living, and I grew up comfortable with death and dying. And I knew that my wife's soul was the most important thing. If she was truly going to die, like these so-called doctors said, I wanted to make sure her soul was taken care of. And so we had to agree to 1 round of remdesivir to get our priest in. To get our priest in, we had to negotiate with not a critical care doctor, but a gastroenterologist to get our priest in to make sure her soul was taken care of. Now, a lot of people don't realize, but COVID was the ushering in of socialized medicine. Okay. Full-blown socialized medicine came into being during COVID. That was the event that ushered it in. Obamacare was the beginning, was the setup. Socialized medicine is what we have today in our death scare system. It's no longer a healthcare system, it's a death scare system. And so her soul was most important. And once that was taken care of, I knew the next thing I had to do was, if she truly was going to die, now that her soul was taken care of, I needed to bring her home so that she could die at home with the people that she loved. And so another way that our loved ones were betrayed during COVID was they took hope from our loved ones. They stole their hope. And as a nurse, I know, because I lived it, that as long as a patient has hope, they have a chance. And when you take hope away from a patient, they die. That's a fact, okay? Science can't prove it, but I can tell you as a medical professional that when you take hope away, people die.
They don't
And
fight
they
back.
took hope. That's the betrayal, was they stole our loved one's hope, okay? And so I knew that if I could get her home and the priest gave her sacraments, that gave her hope. If I brought her home and she could be with her loved ones, that would give her hope. And all I was operating off of was hope, because these so-called doctors said she was going to die, and God had a different plan. And so I wanted to make sure God, as the hands of God, I wanted to make sure God had the ability to do his job. He could have done it anyway. He didn't need me, but he asked me to do it, and I said yes.
I mean,
And
the
so
kid-
I had to get into the hospital to see my wife. When I got into the hospital, I was disgusted. Let me say it again. I was disgusted in the state that my wife was in when I entered that hospital room. No self-respecting nurse could call themselves a medical professional and have a patient in the state that she was in when I entered the room. It was disgusting. And nobody should have to live like that. She was covered in bruises all over her stomach. Okay. This was due to medication administration errors. Okay. They did not administer a medication correctly. And that's why her stomach was covered in bruises. Unnecessary.
they did it
completely
roughly
unnecessary.
because of vax status. Yeah, they did like
completely preventable bruises. Okay. She was lying there naked on her stomach because somebody came up with a brilliant idea that if people can't breathe, that you put them on their stomach. Never in the history of medicine up until that point have you put a patient that is short of breath on their stomach to help them breathe. Never.
We don't even put
Until
infants on their stomachs anymore.
Yeah.
And so she was on her stomach, naked.
I've only
Okay, all
proned
the curtains-
patients in the ICU, Brad. I've only proned
Never-
patients in the
I've never
ICU on
proned
a
a patient.
special bed. It's a special.
A
In the
patient
ICU.
that's on oxygen therapy,
No,
I
that's what I'm
would never
saying.
prone a patient unless they had a gunshot
No.
wound or something
Yeah.
to the back.
No.
But a patient on
Exactly.
oxygen therapy is
Not on
never
the
prone.
floor.
It-
Never on
and
the
so-
floor. Only in the ICU in like special beds. What is wrong with these people? I'm sorry. I'm going to
And
shut
so
up.
they-
Sorry, Brad.
It was disgusting what I saw. No privacy. All the windows were open. All the curtains were open. The little Irish security guard was dancing his jig outside the window in the ICU. He could see her. And patient rights, the image of patient rights was blown out the window with COVID. And we now know that patient rights is a fallacy. It was all smoke and mirrors. But I'm not going to get into all that right now. But true medical professionals to this day still respect patient rights because it's part of humanity. It's not a part of science. Patient rights is a part of humanity. Okay. You don't need a scientist to tell you that somebody is human and they should be treated as a human. But sometime with this socialized medicine, people are no longer recognized as human beings. They're treated as experiments, as lab rats. Okay. And so as soon as I started telling the nurse, this William Fripp character that supposedly was a manager, he began, the reason I know that it was all wrong was because as soon as I pointed it out to him, he started to correct it. Okay. Never in medicine, in my practice, if you were doing things correctly, then somebody pointed those out to you, there was you would offer them an explanation for why things were the way they are. And when I was practicing, if you made a mistake, you said you made a mistake and you quickly correct it. Okay. Not once did this gentleman, he's not even a gentleman, but not once did he apologize, but he began to correct all the errors that were in that room. And he was present for this. He was the only nurse present for this episode. So as a manager, he allowed this patient, my wife, to be in this state. And so that tells me that all his other nurses that supposedly worked for him, that was okay with them too, to allow these patients to be treated like animals. Okay, that's what it tells me. Now, so once they got her all cleaned up and everything, that began a 6-hour standoff with the police. And the police had told me the previous day, the police officers and the sergeant told me that they were interpreting the law for me. They were telling me what the law said. Nowhere in the history of law enforcement are officers to interpret the law. That's not their job. Their job is to file reports and to make judgment calls, not to interpret the law. But these officers continued to argue with, and I had a senator that was advising me on these laws. And these officers continued to interpret the law the way they wanted to interpret it. And so they were not there to help us.
It was the senator who wrote the bill.
The bill. These officers were not there to help us. They were there to help the hospital keep my wife hostage. Because at that point in time, she was a hostage. Okay. That's that's a criminal violation. Okay. But the officers weren't there to uphold the law. The officers were there as security for the hospital to keep my wife a hostage. And not until my wife asked the sergeant, am I a patient or am I
I said, am I a patient or a prisoner? You're going to have to decide today.
And when she asked him that, it finally dawned on him that they were breaking the law at that point. But nobody wanted to admit that. Nobody admitted that they were wrong. And at that point, they brought in an against medical advice form, which in my practice as a nurse, if somebody is not happy with their medical care and they want to leave, then you give them you explain to them the reasons they should stay and what could happen. It's called informed consent, which no longer is the standard in healthcare, but you give them informed consent about the pros and cons of leaving. And you offer them against medical advice form. Since they've been informed, then they can make the decision for themselves to leave against medical advice. Well, I took that form and I turned it into a hospice form because for me, we weren't leaving against medical advice. We were leaving because of medical advice, and it was bad medical advice. And so I changed the form and Gail signed it and William Fripp, the nurse manager, signed it in front of me. I witnessed him signing it. That form has now disappeared. It's not a part of the medical record. I don't know. You tell me how that happens. And it was my intent to take my wife home. And if she was going to die, she was going to die at home. But that's not what happened. And so as soon as the nurse signed the form, he went completely hands off. Now that's called withdrawal of care at that point. He withdrew care from my wife. Now my wife still had all the appliances on her, all the therapies that were saving her life. She still had them on her. And I asked him, I said, do you want me to remove these? Or are you going to do it? Because he went completely hands off. And he saw the error of his ways, and he began to remove the PICC line, the heart monitor, all the appliances that they had her on, and he went completely hands off. And he stood in the doorway, and he tapped his watch, which if I do that, then most people would interpret that as time's ticking. And so he stood there and he watched. And I asked for a wheelchair. And he said, I don't know, you'll have to find a wheelchair. So then he wanted me to leave the room. And so luckily, right outside the door was a therapy chair. Okay. And so I took a therapy chair and I put her in a therapy chair. And she thought she was just going to get up off the bed and jump into the wheelchair and we'd go on home. But she was so weak after 11 days in a hospital with inadequate treatment that she couldn't get herself out of bed. So I helped her. I transferred her into the chair. I brought a gait belt with me. Nobody had a gait belt. Everybody that practices medicine and is a medical professional knows what a gait belt is. Typically, they're readily available because patients tend to fall. There was no gait belt available in the hospital. And I moved her into the chair, and I went to take her off the oxygen, and she was at such high levels of oxygen. When I took her off, she was starving for oxygen. Her brain told her that she needed oxygen. And I just brought a little bottle of oxygen with me because I was just going to take her down to the truck and get her home. So I had to let her sit on the oxygen while William Fripp stood at the door, tapping his watch. And I said, we got to go. And now when I got there, I came into the emergency room and I went past the security desk to a stack of elevators. And I got on the elevators. When I got up to the floor, I turned left, right, and went about halfway down the hallway, and there was my wife's room. That's how quickly I got in there.
A new station alert.
When it came time to leave, the so-called nurse said, "Oh, I'm going to take you a shortcut." And they had told our daughter to move my vehicle, which I did not give permission, to move our vehicle around to the back of the hospital. Now, where they told her to move the truck is where the medical examiner comes or the funeral homes come to pick up the morgue in the hospital. It's also to make deliveries of other things, but it's also the entrance where the medical examiner comes. Okay, and they retrieve people from the morgue. They took us out of the room and they took us through a mouse maze through the hospital. And if anybody's ever been in a hospital, you know what a maze the hospital is. By the time I got her down to the car, well, they didn't even put us on the patient elevator.
Sorry.
The hospital, you know the difference between freight elevator. Put us on the back door.
Okay, hold on. There's
We have a hot mic.
It's very loud and staticky.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm muted, but it sounds like a lot of feedback.
okay. I think I got it. I
You
think
hear
I got
now? So anyway, my wife couldn't get out of the chair, so I had to help her into the truck. And Gail, you can tell this part because I wasn't paying attention to this guy.
Yeah, so Huckleberry, I did think that I was just going to hop into the chair. I didn't know about anything about like, what do you call that? Like when your muscles atrophy or whatever.
Atrophy.
Yeah, atrophy. I was thinking, didn't think anything of being like in a bed for 12 days and not being allowed to get up. And then like, so my legs didn't work, and that was a surprise. And that was a surprise to both of us. But I want to play a video. My daughter called Colonel Allen West during this time. And before I tell you what happened when we got to the car and how evil this, I mean, it was pretty evil, but she was stuck in the hallway because when Brad called our daughter and said, "I'm going in to get mom," she was like, my daughter has kids, and she was like, "Oh my gosh, I got to drive up there." So, he's 2 minutes from the hospital. She's 15 minutes from the hospital. So she gets stuck in the hallway, which is how we got all the footage of the police. And by the way, the police say they were never there, but you saw the picture. They claim they were never there. And there were 6. I mean, she's even got video of them talking to her. But she called Colonel Allen West, who was running for governor at the time. And she called Senator Bob Hall, and she called everybody I ever worked on their campaigns. And Colonel Allen West said, "You go Facebook Live right now. You go Facebook." He talked to the police, and he talked to the security, and he talked to the doctors. And he had said, because we went to that hospital because he had gotten ivermectin, hydroxychloroquine, and budesonide just a month earlier. And it was in the paper. So we knew that they did that protocol. But he said, "You go live, go Facebook Live, and put as many eyes on this thing as you can," because they were kind of afraid that they were going to pull Huckleberry out and tase him. And I want to tell you, when the look on his, it was one thing for them to be cocky and rude and mean to my family, to my daughter and my husband when they were on the other end of a phone. But when they had to walk into that room and Huckleberry was already in there and they had to face him, they were like, those old comedy movies where everybody's rushing around, bumping into each other. That's what they were doing, because when he got in that room, they ran in after him and they said, "You need to get out of here." And he was so disgusted by what he saw, because they kept you naked. They just wanted to look in the window so they didn't have to touch you. Like you were like an animal in a cage. Like they would want to look at you through the window. So they kept you naked. Like this never happens in nursing, where you assess somebody without touching them. And he turned on his heels and he said, "Where's her privacy curtain? Go get her. She needs to clean her up." And they got so scared. They were like bumping into each other in the hallway trying to get it done. So and he said, "I'm not going anywhere without my wife. She's not your guinea pig. She's coming home with me today." And because he was so mad, like I was like, "Get him, go get him," and I knew that I had the best chance of living. But I want to play. So my daughter goes live, and this was her Facebook Live.
So I'm going to document it. Today is Wednesday, December 15th. I'm sitting at Medical City of Plano. They had officers in the hallway. They were denying Senate Bill 572. We started at about 10 o'clock this morning. It's 11:17 a.m. I just wanted to make sure I was documenting that today. I just found out about the case manager, that on top of that, a few days ago I had to fire the night nurse. My mom complained about being afraid of her night nurse. Allen West called in, and he said that he got different treatment than her, and it was discrimination. So they've already spoken to Allen West, Colonel Allen West, and Senator Bob Hall, and everybody is on our side about this. It's absolutely ridiculous. My mom is afraid. She wants to go home. They're not giving her proper treatment. It's insane. See them all? Horrible. It's crazy. It's absolutely crazy. So I want documentation of everything.
So my daughter, she did document a lot of things, and then so when they had her pull that car out, I mean, it was to send us a message where like Huckleberry said, where the funeral homes pick up the bodies for the morgue, right? That's where they had her park, and that's where they took me the long way out, and it was using up oxygen. And when they were getting me in the car, Huckleberry was trying to get me in the car, and he said to my daughter, he said, if she stays, we'll revive her once, because they had made me a DNR, and I kept telling them, I'm not a DNR, guys, and they would say, yes, you are, and I would say, no, I'm a full code. And my daughter would call and be like, they still got you as a DNR. I'd be like, I'm not a DNR, and they'd be like, yeah, you are. So it wasn't even like they wouldn't even my wishes were not being. But so he said, we'll if she stays, we'll revive her once, and but she's gonna die if you take her home. And my daughter said, get behind me, Satan. And then he told Huckleberry, he said, mark my words, she'll be dead tonight, probably by the time you get her home. And he flipped, like, well, didn't he? Turned around and he said, you better hope. He said, I know my wife. You better hope she does die. I'm going to do everything I can to save her, but I know my wife. If she lives, she's never going to stop. She's never going to stop coming after you guys. And he was like, even God won't be able to help you. And then he like said some choice words that I can't say right now. And he slammed the door and he drove me home. And so I see comments in there like, this is one part where we're always, as survivors, talking about, and I think Jenny hit on some of this on Thursday. So let me find that.
Gail, where that video that you showed from your daughter, where was that taken? Where was that live taken at?
That was the hallway that was right outside the ICU doors. And
was that your room that she showed, or was that a hallway?
All those people were standing right outside my door, not letting us out. So Kathy said, to this day, I feel guilty.
At that point, she was a hostage.
Yeah.
They weren't letting her leave.
Yeah.
So they were violating the law by holding her as a hostage.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, I think that's what gets me the most every time I hear this story, and I pick something out more about it. But every time I hear that, where they were like, you're a DNR, and you're like, no, I'm a full code, and they're like, no, you're a DNR, and I'm just thinking how the shift has happened in healthcare, how they were, we heard about, people like Grace Shera, they were trying to get her nebulizer treatments, and they were like, no, we're not doing nebulizers because it would aerosolize. And you're just like, wait, what? And they were like, oh, they want to do all these crazy things. They want to take away informed consent. I think that's what gets me, is that it was so blatant. It was almost like they were saying, yeah, you had to say to them, am I a prisoner? I'm either a patient or a prisoner.
Or a prisoner.
And this is a healthcare system. This is a system with the duty to do no harm.
Yeah, and here's the thing about a lot of, and I see this in so many people's medical records, it was the this is so similar to when Jenny was talking about the apnea test, which was, Jenny, just so people, maybe not everybody heard. Go ahead, Huckleberry.
Real quick, just so Cara mentioned earlier about the law enforcement. They said it's not a criminal act; it's a healthcare act. It's a healthcare thing. That's where that whole idea comes from is law enforcement doesn't want to step on the toes of death scare providers.
Yeah.
And they don't want to call anything a crime because in healthcare, it's based off of standards of care, right? What a reasonable person, a reasonable trained person would do in a situation, and those are all the battles that eventually wind up having to be fought in a court of law to prove malpractice and malfeasance and all that stuff.
Right.
But that's where that separation, when you go to the police and you say, there's a crime being committed, my wife is being held hostage and they're abusing her, the police say, oh no, that can't be, she's in a hospital.
That's crazy.
So no crimes occur in a hospital. So it's not a criminal thing. It's a hospital thing, which is completely wrong. But
So
that's where that philosophy comes from.
So Mick and I had Sheriff Mack on a while ago on Nation Betrayed. Mick helped me with the interview there, and and he was like, yeah, every sheriff around should have been there to protect families' rights and patient rights. And we're going to talk about that a little bit in terms of Leslie Batts, who spoke on Monday and went through her how to report a crime, has a bill that she's been working on that I think is brilliant. It's really well written and it needs to be in every state. And that is for police officers to have mandatory training on patient rights and what are our rights and where they are required to step in. Because to say I don't have a protocol for that is unacceptable if somebody's being harmed in a hospital. I mean, there's people do get harmed in hospitals all the time. And when going back to the DNR thing, Huckleberry and I have seen this many, many times where committees, ethics committees and everything have made decisions about DNRs. And in Texas, I know everybody's probably like, well, Texas is a red state. How could that happen? Well, you're not safe based on politics. This is apolitical. And Texas actually has and I'm going to have Jenny talk about the apnea test and how that nurse saved her life. But in Texas, we used to have the 10-day rule, where if a doctor determined after 10 days that you were not salvageable, they could end your life. But I'll wait until I won't call on Jenny until she comes back. But
as a nurse, okay, and people don't realize this, but in a healthcare setting, in the absence of a family or an advocate, the nurse, the registered nurse, is the primary advocate for their patient in a healthcare setting. Okay, that is standard of practice in nursing. And I have yet to talk to any old school nurses to say anything different than that. So in a healthcare setting, a nurse is the primary advocate. They stand in the place of the patient. Okay,
Applause.
That's what an advocate is. They stand in the place of the patient to advocate good, bad, and indifferent for that patient. Okay, that patient's rights are to be upheld by the nurse. Okay, and so all these things happen because nurses are not doing their job. Okay, that's their only function in a healthcare setting, is to be an advocate for the patient, along with all the other things that they have to do. But first and foremost, if there is no advocate, the nurse is the advocate. And so if they're given an order that is not in the best interest of the patient, it is the nurse's responsibility to question the order and to advocate for the patient, not to just carry out the orders as the Gestapo, but to stand in the place of the patient and look out for their welfare. And that is where, in my opinion, that is where socialized medicine has taken over, and nurses no longer understand their role. In the healthcare setting. It's just to follow orders.
And we've heard we've heard y'all talk about how the decline of nursing. I want to go to Jenny and tell people about because yours wasn't COVID. Yours wasn't a COVID story. Kara's was hospice. Mine, me and Steve Martinez is on, and Patty Giuliano's on, and all three of us are survivors during COVID. But yours was a little while ago.
Very long ago.
And you are a brain death survivor.
Yes. Like 41 years ago. And doctors wanted my organs, is what it boiled down to. I was other than being brain dead, I was a healthy specimen and could help a lot of people with my organs. So they tried to convince my husband that I was brain dead, and he refused to sign paperwork to let them harvest my organs.
Good for him.
But even with his refusal, there came a time where they were really pushing it and telling him that she's truly brain dead. We can prove it to you. And so they did an apnea test, which is they turned off the ventilator. They made it so that I did not have ventilator support. I went from being ventilator dependent to no support at all. And that apnea test is a self-fulfilling prophecy. What it does is that a person who's on high levels of respiratory support, their body becomes dependent on that, and it forgets how to breathe on its own. So what happens is the person cannot just start breathing when the respirator's turned off cold turkey. They should be weaned off of a respirator, ventilator. And when it's not weaned, there's a high chance they will not breathe. But I had a nurse there that was a really great nurse, and she kept whispering in my ear and telling me, you must take a breath, you must breathe. And I could hear and understand what was going on around me. They said I was brain dead, but I had full cognitive ability and function and comprehension. I just couldn't speak, couldn't move, couldn't respond. And so, but I remember her strongly encouraging me repeatedly and not giving up on me to start breathing. And I finally did take a breath. And the organ transplant team doctor there was not happy because that was proof that I was not brain dead. A brain dead person cannot take even one breath independently. I was listening to what you were saying, Huckleberry, and several things kind of popped out. One is during COVID, when my own father was dying and I was really sick, and after that experience, I did more research into the COVID virus. And studies showed, and the scientific studies were showing, that the high levels of oxygen actually increased the growth and propagation of the virus within the body. What happened is the COVID virus is an oxygen dependent virus. It must have high levels of oxygen in order to reproduce and multiply. So it goes into a cell, it infects that cell, and as long as that cell is oxygenated, it multiplies until that cell ruptures and millions of new virus spread into the bloodstream and get into more cells. And this is a vascular and blood disease more than it is a respiratory disease. And what happens is the body, if the body becomes a little bit hypoxic, which means a little bit low in its oxygen level, it actually slows the virus down and makes it so the virus can't multiply and increase and cause more problems. So a little bit of a mild hypoxia is actually better when you're trying to fight this virus than if you give it lots, you just feed it all this oxygen. And the studies were out there, and the DHS knew this. I got this information from DHS. You have to know how to do the research and dig into their website.
Yep.
It was in there. They knew that this virus was fed by oxygen, and your body could fight it off if you were a little hypoxic, a little low oxygen. Yes, you wouldn't feel good because you're hypoxic, but as long as it's not a severe hypoxia, you're not going to have brain damage if your oxygen levels are 88 or 89 or 90. That's really not going to cause brain damage. Okay? It's going to make you feel miserable, but it's not going to cause brain damage, but it's also going to help stop this virus from spreading further in your body and getting worse and multiplying in your body. And all the hospitals, all the professionals were feeding it oxygen. And this thing multiplied like crazy. And so putting people on 60 liters was not uncommon. It's like, that's unheard of. 60 liters a minute? Come on. That's unheard of. When have we ever done 60 liters a minute of oxygen for somebody? Okay, Brad, Barry, you were an ICU nurse, you said, right?
Yeah. So
did you ever have patients on 60 liters before COVID?
No, not even on a ventilator.
Not even on a ventilator. They don't put them on 60 liters.
So
they were feeding.
What you're describing with the brain death is it's a known phenomena because it occurs with people with COPD, and it has to do with the brain's response to low oxygen. Mm-hmm. So in a normal human being, your lungs, your brain tells your lungs to take in air based on lowering oxygen levels. Okay. So the blood is circulated through the lungs, picks up oxygen, it goes out to the cells, drops off oxygen, picks up carbon dioxide and brings it back to the lungs, where you breathe it out and you breathe in more air. But people with COPD lose that instinct to breathe based on low oxygen.
Right.
They actually breathe. They take a breath based on. They stop breathing based on high oxygen levels.
Right.
So if you give somebody on COPD oxygen, you will actually kill them because their brain will say, "Oh, don't take a breath. The oxygen level's too high." And so your body. So what happens? They get used to the low oxygen levels.
Their bodies are used to the.
Your brain changes, and it says, "Oh, it's too high. Don't breathe." And so it flips, and that's what they were using to determine brain death. Well, anybody knows that if a normal functioning person, if your brain is used to high oxygen levels, it's going to tell you not to breathe. There's going to be a longer period between breaths, and so that's what they were doing to gauge brain death, right?
Yeah,
and
my dad
COVID,
had.
You know, it was a gas exchange issue, right? Because where the oxygen comes into the cells and it exchanges with carbon dioxide, and that's called gas exchange, and that happens at the molecular level in the lungs. Right. And when they were forcing all this high oxygen into people's lungs, they were preventing the gas exchange, is what they were actually causing to happen. And so people that aren't able to exchange oxygen for carbon dioxide, they go into an acidosis because their balance is off. There's more CO2 in the blood than there is oxygen, and they get acidotic, and then the organs begin to fail because of these high oxygen levels that are preventing gas exchange. So that just goes to show you that the science has failed us yet again.
Right.
Because we know what the science is. it's called the practice of medicine for a reason, because when something doesn't work, you change your method and find something that does work. But during COVID, they had to stick with the protocol, even though they knew it didn't work. They knew what cured COVID. They knew what treated COVID, but they refused to allow people to receive the correct treatment, because in order to use the emergency authorized hokey pokey and the emergency authorized treatments, there can't be other alternatives. So they had to demonize all the other safe, effective, and cost-effective treatments, so they could go with these treatments that were not effective, extremely expensive, and caused people to die.
So I want to go on from the. So there's a couple things I want to say about the oxygen, and then because I remember Huckleberry, when he got me home and I was a mess, the critical 72 hours of when I was home were, I mean, the oxygen was a problem. The oxygen was very much a problem. And we were, of course, Dr. Richard Bartlett, Laura Bartlett's brother, was helping us and got us in, the things that we needed. And he was, budesonide 1 milligram every 2 hours. I had to do it. And they had to get that budesonide nebulizer treatment in me. And
Steve, turn off yours.
Yeah, I think that's Steve coming. You're going to have to go out and go in maybe. I'm going to take you off stage and then just maybe go out and back in so you can fix your sound. But I remember him, Huckleberry, he had to make some choices, and thankfully, I always say he can redneck anything. He can redneck anything in our house and fix it. And so him being a nurse and then being able to redneck stuff, he was able to hook up some oxygen concentrators with some bottles and crank everything up. And I had all these hoses, pardon me. And so this was I'm just going to give you an idea of what, let me get them off the screen there. This was half of the, so we had 9 bottles at the time I got home, and I was going through them 1 an hour. He also had the oxygen concentrator hooked up, and we had 2 oxygen concentrators. I was going through 1 bottle of these an hour in addition to that, because he had everything hooked up to me, mask, just to get me to where I could even be comfortable. And so my daughter found a respiratory company. She was desperate because Huckleberry was like, we're going to run out of oxygen. We need to think of a plan. You need to go. We're probably going to need to take you to a different hospital. And I was like, well, I'm going to die because I'm not going to a hospital. And my daughter reached out through Patriot-owned businesses and found a respiratory company that opened up after hours. And when we finally met the man who a couple months later returned in the bottles, we found out he opened a respiratory company in Garland, Texas, here near us, because his son could never get oxygen. He had a condition where he needed oxygen. He could never get oxygen in time or enough of it. And his son died. And so he swore that wouldn't happen. So he opened up after hours and let us get that bunch of oxygen and that bunch of oxygen, right? And that got us through the first night. That and 2 oxygen concentrators. That's how addicted to the oxygen they had me. And that was how, and so one of the things the hospital told Huckleberry is you'll never be able to manage the oxygen. Well, they didn't know my husband. He can he can redneck anything. So, and I say that, and then I'm going to show you just this little 9-second video. This was me the first night. I wasn't in good condition. Um, so it was pretty desperate. It was pretty desperate. And he was able to, I mean, budesonide, I think, saved my life, but it was, budesonide, ivermectin, all those things that we needed. And I remember my husband saying to me, the nurses on here will be like, yeah, I can picture myself saying it. The most irritating words I ever heard, and I say it myself now. He would say things like, I can help you, but I can't do it for you. Grr. Like, it would make me so mad. He would be like, purse lip breathing. I need you to breathe in and breathe out like you're breathing through a straw. See, Jenny's doing it. And I was like, if I hear purse lip breathing one more time, if I could walk, I would get out of this chair and strangle you. And he would say things like, but it was so, and he would be like, you got to get up and walk. Dr. Bartlett said, you got to get up and walk every 30 minutes. Every 30 minutes, you need to get up and walk. You need to act like you're fighting for your life, because you are. And that first 72 hours was so critical, so critical. And there were things that went wrong and all that stuff. So when I hear people say, I wish I would have, I wanted to go in and get my loved one, I feel so guilty. I want to talk about survivor guilt here. We're going to go into this survivor guilt. I feel so guilty for not going. My husband was a nurse. He had been a critical care nurse. We had the things at home that somehow landed in my lap. If it had been Huckleberry in the hospital and me trying to save him, first of all, I don't know that he would be alive, because men are far more compliant when they're in the hospital, and he probably would have maybe agreed to be vented or whatever. I don't know. No, but I wouldn't have known how to help him. I don't know what would have happened had the tables been turned. Huckleberry felt guilty. Huckleberry, I can remember our city council member friend Shelby coming over. It was like the second day I was home, and he was like, wow, and he was so concerned. And I remember Huckleberry just breaking down, and he was like, Shelby, they tried to kill my wife, man. They tried to kill my wife. I took her there. I left her there. I thought she was in good hands. I mean, he dealt with that. Shake your head yes or no. I know you're on mute, but you dealt with a lot of that same guilt that people feel. And I know the nurses and the doctors, and maybe Patty G, if she's in a position where she can speak at the moment, maybe say, oh, there we go. Steve, I think Steve is back. Hey, Patty.
Hey, how you guys doing? I didn't want to interrupt.
No, are you at Disney World? Are you at Disney?
No, but I'm in paradise. We'll say that. I'm in St. Augustine.
Oh.
Yeah, my husband surprised me to go to dinner, and I'm like, what? Here we are.
Oh, man. We're jealous.
I know. I know. We are jealous. What a nice surprise. And then you also joined us. So, well, I don't want to interrupt your dinner, but so.
Oh, you're good. I'm done.
Since now I know that you're at dinner, I just, what you run. So Patty is a survivor. She is a whistleblower, and she runs our PTSD trauma group. You must hear a lot about survivor guilt.
I do. And you know what's really fascinating, because, Brad and Gail, you guys are doing a great job sharing just all the behind the scenes stuff that goes on in the hospital. And, now, because I left the acute care world, in hospital leadership, and I got back into private clinical practice, in psychiatry. And I get more and more people that have this survivor's guilt. And the group that we work with and all the folks that have come on to some of our calls, there's this tremendous guilt as if anyone thought they could do anything. And here's the thing, right? The most trusted profession in the world is nursing, and yet it was the most deceptive. And during COVID, so many people put their hands and their trust in, well, they're going to take care of me. And what they did was they just followed a protocol that had really no efficacy, blindly followed it. So how could anybody put themselves in that position to have felt like they could have done more? And that survivor's guilt is so real for people, and it's so sad. It's tragic. I was in it. I was in the hospital, and they wouldn't let my husband come in to see me, and we both worked at the same hospital. So when you think about yourselves, like Brad, you're a nurse. I'm a nurse practitioner now, and several of us here, everybody, we were in the business and our hands were tied, and we couldn't help ourselves and help our family members. So the guilt that people feel is so tragic because you all did what you thought you had to do, and you put your care of your loved ones in the hands of people you thought you could trust. That's the tragedy. And that's why we're here. That's why I'm here, is to share what none of you had the ability to do, because what went on behind the scenes in the hospital was just, it was sinister. It was sinister.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And so, I mean, I just, the thing is I would never want people to feel like they were responsible. It's logical that you would take your loved one to a hospital and expect them to get help and not harmed. Like that's what people do. That's where you go. If you're hurt, you're injured, you're whatever, you go to the hospital. That's what you do. And so
it's like Jenny said,
So sadly, I
the
can't
authorities
hear. I
knew
just
the
got
answers.
booted off somehow.
Are you there, Patty?
I don't know if you can all hear me.
Yeah,
Gail,
we
give
can.
me a thumbs
Yes.
up if you can hear me. I don't want to interrupt anybody.
Yes.
We can hear you.
Okay. So I'm just going to kind of run this real quick, and then I'll try to jump out and jump back in. But yeah, the fact that people feel guilty or remorse or they could have done more, we did so much to try to get the word out way before this group got as big as it has. And individually, we just didn't have a big enough voice to try to tell people and help people. And everyone's, well, at least hopefully everyone it's on this call, we've all connected with different providers, physicians, and people that have been whistleblowers. And yet, at the time, in 2020 through 2024, 2025 even today, so many people don't know you've got to have a voice, and you've got to find a way to make your loved one safe, like with the work Laura Bartlett's doing with the I do not consent forms. And so during the pandemic, that guilt, it's so real. And I do have so many patients that, and all we can, so I'm going to pop back off because I'm completely muted now for some reason.
All right. Yeah,
But it's like Jenny said earlier, the answers were out there. The fact that the so-called medical professionals failed to do their own research, and they say they trusted the journals. Even in my practice, I could tell that the journals were not. A lot of things didn't add up with the journals. And doctors have forgotten how to do their own investigative work because the studies were out there. I mean, just something as simple as a mask and all the lies that were told about masks. The research was there. Oh, there's no research. No, the research is there. But they didn't practice medicine. When you're told what to do and you just do it, that's called socialized medicine. That's not practicing medicine like we used to have here in the United States. Practice means
we have a comment. We have a comment down here from Debbie, and she says, "My husband Jimmy Don had COPD, and his normal oxygen ran between 88 to 93, which is pretty typical for COPD. We informed the hospital about that. However, they insisted that his oxygen levels should be 99 to 100%. So they were over oxygenating him.
Yeah.
And this is any doctor, even a doctor who's not a respiratory expert, knows that that's harmful to someone with COPD.
Yes, exactly.
So they're doing things that they knew were harmful.
That's the crazy part. And that was the other thing that I just, me and Huckleberry, if I could have walked, I probably would have clunked him. I was so paranoid about my oxygen, and he wouldn't let me see the oxygen, the pulse ox. He would check it, and he had to assess my oxygen, using the normal, like, is oxygen going to her brain, to her body, her. And so I pulled this up for a reason, because what Huckleberry would say to me, he said, you didn't know what your oxygen was before you went in the hospital, and you're paranoid about it now. Because I was like, I got to see the pulse ox. And he was like, what are you going to do about it? He's like, I can assess you.
When we were in the emergency room and I filled out the triage paperwork, she was at 72%. According to the machine, she was at 72%. A nurse knows that you have to perform an assessment and you have to evaluate a patient's mental status to determine their oxygen, if they're getting adequate oxygenation or not. That's the only way to really tell, is by somebody's mentation, because besides the heart being the first organ to get oxygen, the brain is the second organ to get oxygen. And so if there's enough oxygen in the body, somebody will be able to carry on a conversation and act normally, even at 72%.
Absolutely. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
I just wanted to make a real quick comment that since I was on hospice, I now have bilateral diaphragm paralysis and or dysfunction due to laying in the hospital onto that medical bed, and they had me on a BiPAP machine the whole time and oxygen. I would pull it off, but the damage that oxygen not monitored or assessed, like y'all are saying, is extremely crucial to every aspect of the way the body reacts, acts, and behaves and functions. I mean, it's key, and it needs to be monitored. And also during COVID, and due to that, I was on a non-invasive ventilator due to sleep apnea and diaphragm and all these issues brought on by hospice and medical errors and negligence, etc. And so I learned that the Philips Respironics machines, BiPAP, and CPAP machines and ventilators that they use in the hospitals and at home for patients during this COVID, nightmare and purge and everything, they have all been recalled. So I know that 2 of mine have been recalled, actually 3, but due to carcinogenic off gases and due to the styrofoam breaking apart and going down the breathing tube into the patient's lungs, which causes cancer and all kinds of problems. So I just wanted to say how very important what you're saying is, and for people to stay on top and be aware that, don't always, do your research, be aware, and listen to the patient. They know their bodies best.
Yeah, they know exactly.
Yeah, that's a great point. And when I practiced nursing, I always listened to what my patient told me, because nobody knows better what's going on inside of somebody than the patient themselves. And if the patient didn't know, the family that was there was the most helpful of all. And the tragedy during COVID and before COVID was that families were kicked out of patients' rooms.
Right.
And that could have been so beneficial, but because nurses are not perfect, and we miss a lot of things because of the demands that are put on nurses. And it's a very high stress environment. But the oxygenation, I mean, there's a reason why oxygen is a controlled substance, that you just can't walk into a store and buy bottles of oxygen. It's because oxygen not only can give life, but it also can take life. And to have people practicing medicine that don't know the first thing about oxygen management and how to use assessment to determine adequacy, and just to rely on protocols, that's a crime. And until law enforcement jumps on and understands the crimes that are being committed for the sake of science that is not proven, you know, we're going to continue to follow this fallacy that, you know, people are being killed, but it's not a crime. It's just medicine.
Well, let me ask you this. When you're talking about that, the nurses, when they were given that protocol to people, and maybe at that time, because it was kind of a new protocol with the remdesivir inventing, but in hospice, I want to bring this up. The medication that they use, that they give people, the 3 medications, Haldol, Ativan, and morphine, are typical ones that they use. They know that it is not supposed to be given to people over 65. They know combining those drugs are toxic. They know they will cause depressed breathing. They cause hallucinations. They cause coma. They cause death. So those nurses, to me, that are giving those medications to the hospice patients know darn well that that medication will kill them. That's not a secret.
So I mean, that's a great topic, Marcia. You know, we even had these ethical discussions when I was in nursing school about specifically hospice and the difference between hospice and palliative care and withdrawal of care and all those things. It's, you know, hospice is an ethical issue. It's not, science hasn't proved the ethics in hospice. And you know, I never went into hospice as a nurse because I wasn't at a point in my life where I was comfortable with that. But a lot of times, at least in my own personal life, dealing with family members who are dying, actively dying, those medications are not even necessary. So for it's those, the hospice doctors write convenience orders, and it's up to the nurses, in my opinion, to make the call as to whether they administer those medications or not. And it depends on the condition of the patient and after a thorough assessment. But when it comes to hospice, it's beyond medical care at that point. It's a whole patient care, and nurses that aren't, number one, qualified to take care of a whole person. When I say whole person, body, mind, and spirit. Okay, that's the holistic approach of nursing, is that nursing used to bring to the table, was that nurses could practice outside of the structure of allopathic medicine and tend to a patient's spiritual and emotional well-being along with their physical well-being. But what's happened in hospice is that the people that run the hospice, it's convenience for the staff to if the doctor is going to write these blanket orders that a nurse would have to determine, you know, need for these things, that if the doctor wrote the order, you just give them. Okay, there must be a reason why the doctor would write the order for those, so you just give them because that's what it's just following orders, right? Nursing has become the unprofessional following of orders. We just follow the orders. We don't use critical thinking We don't use critical thinking. We don't use our ability to assess and make decisions. We just follow orders.
Well, but if someone is not in pain and they even say they're not in pain and you're still giving them that medication,
Right.
then to me, that is the biggest medical crime in history, because you're murdering the person. And
Right.
and most of these people were not dying, actively
Right.
dying, and they immediately started giving them all of those drugs. And I hold the nurses responsible, because even though a doctor writes something PRN, they give it to them every 4 hours, and they, kick it to every 2 hours. And it's just, to me, it's murder. It's premeditated. And I will never accept the philosophy that what they are doing is right. It's wrong. It's criminal. So
Things
So,
have changed a lot over the years.
I know that you know that, and that you're not disagreeing with me. So
Yeah, things have changed so much over the years, because I know that when I first was trained as a nurse too, even when there was a protocol, okay, you are still supposed to use judgment.
Right.
You're supposed to assess, evaluate, and adjust the plan as needed.
yeah.
And so you're not supposed to just, well, this is the treatment. We're going to do this treatment, and we're not going to adjust it for
individuality.
reality.
It's supposed to be
But that
individualized plan, but in hospice, it isn't. It's a one size fits all.
And it's not
has been-
because even in end of life, it's not not everybody is the same.
Shouldn't be.
Everybody's path is different.
And I can tell you, when my mom was put on hospice and they put her on pain medication, they started her out on 5 milligrams of morphine. She was an 89-pound, 5-foot little woman who was opioid naive.
Yeah.
And so I was like, whoa, had I not known, I would have given her like the whole 5 milligrams. I was like, okay, no, we're not doing 5 milligrams. That's just way too much. So, I mean, that's the thing. You have to have some critical thinking, but that is the one thing that really gets me, is that nurses used to have their own nursing ability to walk in, their own nursing plan, to say, wow, that patient has pneumonia. Let's get him up. Let's get them up. Let's get those lungs moving. Let's use incentive spirometry. Let's do those things to take care of, so that we don't have to do the oxygen, so that we don't have to do those things, because it's so much better for the patient. And we've lost that, even into the fact of, like you were talking about, natural immunity and good hand washing. I worked in bone marrow transplant, where we actually gave chemotherapy and radiation to eliminate their immune system. They had no immune system. That's the whole point. You wipe out their immune system and you replace their bone marrow with somebody else who's disease free. There's 2 different types of transplant, but that's one of them. And so we didn't garb up with masks and gowns and body condoms. No, we did good hand washing. We ensured that the patients were well, hydrated, that they got bathed, because you don't want all that skin, that dead cells on them. We made sure that they had the appropriate things to take care of their mouth. We got them up, we moved them, and guess what? They survived, and they had no immunity. I'm like,
it took me longer to recover from the abuse and neglect than it did anything else in the hospital.
Yeah, you said there was not even a gate belt in the room. That's proof that they never got her out of bed. So if they didn't even have a gate belt in the room, they weren't getting her out of bed at all.
That's why they put them in the ICU. That's why they put them in the ICU, so that they had to stay in the bed.
Yeah, so
the rules in the ICU is, if you're sick enough to be in the ICU, you shouldn't get out of bed.
Right. So forced bed confinement is going to cause, it's really going to accelerate all decline.
oh,
Yes.
And so
Include bed
bed
sores.
confinement is actually a form of restraint, and it's illegal to restrain someone.
Yes.
Yep, and that's what we saw a lot. That's what we see a lot. Okay, so I want to kind of move from this discussion.
Cara had something to add. Just real
April,
quick.
you're correct.
Thank you. I wanted to say that they kept me in the bed. They even went so far as to put an alarm under me because I kept trying to get out of the bed. I would fall onto the hard floor. I would crawl over the railing, but I couldn't stand up because my muscles weren't working, and I would fall on that hard concrete floor, and they would just walk by me, and I would be just left laying there in my diaper. And also the nurses, I agree with Marcia. The nurses are the first line of defense between
Right.
us and the physicians, and they don't stand up. In fact, I would even have nurses be the abusers, and they would laugh with one another sometimes as they would be leaving me and say, well, I'll see you tomorrow, or maybe I won't. And they would laugh about that maybe I'd be dead. And that was
How
cruel.
Very cruel.
I mean, we have had victims' families who put recorders in the room or who had recorded nurses saying things like to patients on a ventilator,
Threatening violence.
yeah, why don't
And
you
that's not a crime.
why
Since
don't
when
you
is that
just
not a crime?
die? Yeah, or like the doctor in Dallas that was like, me and my staff would like nothing more than to see the unvaccinated clubbed to death like baby seals. He's still in charge of that. So like we've seen the worst of the worst, and it's getting worse. And I want you guys to remember, Lisa Butler mentioned this earlier in the program. There was something called Operation Nightingale, where 9 schools in Florida were exposed for selling mostly foreign students.
It's more than 9 schools. There's been a list published, but those are going to prosecution right now.
Yeah,
but it's
what
something
happened?
like 30 schools.
It's 30 schools now.
Yeah.
So they were selling transcripts and fake degrees to nurses for RNs, LVNs, and respiratory therapists. And the same had happened with doctors, right? With some schools in New York, but this was that started off with these schools in Florida, and it had been like 12,000 nurses that weren't that, and then they would go to like New York and sit their exam, and then they would get licensed in other states from there. And so, but the last count, it was over 20,000 fake nurses existed, and
Oh
many
my
of them,
gosh.
yeah, and many of them left and went back to their countries. Some of them are being prosecuted, have already been indicted, and are being prosecuted.
Were these largely foreign nurses then you're
Yeah,
saying? Or?
largely from the Middle East and Africa, some from South America, but some American nurses too. But they were getting like $16,000 for these, and it wasn't fake. It actually was. They were giving them a real transcripts and real nursing degrees, like it was authentic, but they just didn't earn it, right? And so they had just enough knowledge to sit the exam, or they'd have somebody sit the exam. And so you had these people that were, I suspect some of them, because Texas, actually, there was a lot of them in Texas, but the nursing board websites have some lists of, most of them have a list of who in your state is been indicted. But that unfolded over a course of many years until those schools were busted. And I'm sure there's more. So that is being prosecuted. The other thing is, so I kind of want to move into that, talk about, because this was a great discussion, because we had all y'all nurses on, and you have so much information that it's been an educational, quite the education. But I want to talk a little bit about survivors as evidence, making the most of second chances, and address why it's still happening. So there's a lot of, for the lack of using the word commonalities, there's a lot of commonalities between gosh, and it's even more extraordinary because like Jenny's experience was 40 years ago. Carr's experience was 10 years ago. Mine was 5 years ago. We still get calls today. Laura Bartlett's hospital hostage helpline still gets calls. And sometimes she'll call us to connect her with people maybe we know, she knows people, but we're still getting those pleas for help. Help me save my husband, help me save my son, help me save my loved one. So it's this is, I have always said, and now I have proof because of survivors like Jenny and Cara and Steve, who keeps getting kicked off, and Patty and me, and all the survivors that come forward. We are evidence. We are evidence that it didn't start with COVID. It's not ending with COVID. We are evidence that the people who weren't allowed in to see their loved ones or didn't quite know what to look for. I mean, when my aunt was killed in hospice in 2017, I felt like something wasn't right, but I couldn't put my finger on it until I read Marsha's book, Betrayed by Hospice: Stories from the Deathbed. And so when survivors speak out, we are evidence. And oftentimes, and Donna, I don't know if you want to speak, give your 2 cents here, but oftentimes I hear from people who had a loved one die. They were like, I knew that was the case. I knew it was the case. And now I'm hearing proof that was happening on the inside because I suspected it. When you hear survivors speak about their experience, about what happened, what goes through your head, knowing that you had all these suspicions about Sean?
So it was really weird that whenever the first question that was asked was he vaccinated? To which, as you know, my husband's response was, no, but I caught COVID from somebody who did. So that was our first, indication that something was just not good. But you're supposed to trust. I mean, these people are professionals. They are to, give us answers, heal him, send him home. And then when they decided to admit him, the next clue was, I'm sorry, but you can't go past the door. You'll have to go home. So it's really weird listening to these conversations tonight, because had I known any of that, we would have turned around and went home. But we just trusted, Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm not sure where to go from there, because there's just so much to the story. It was just one thing after another until the third day he was in the hospital. That's when I knew we were in trouble, because I got a call around midnight from a nurse, and I was already in bed asleep. And she said, I need you to come to the hospital. And I immediately thought, well, he must be gone. Something's terrible. Something went terribly wrong. And she asked me, she said, has nobody called you? And I said, no, just you. And she said, you need to get dressed and come to the hospital, and I'll talk to you on the way. So I was already dressed. I don't know. I was paranoid, and I was already dressed. I knew where my purse was. I was in the car in like 60 seconds. So the point is that had happened 2 hours ago, over 2 hours ago, and no one called me. And so her first thing is, has anyone called you? If she wouldn't have called me, when would I have known my husband was now in ICU? There's just so many balls that were dropped, and so many there's so many steps. It was just one thing after another. And then when I did get to the ICU, they wouldn't let me go in. They said the doctor would come out and talk to me. And the first thing out of his mouth was, well, the nurse had told me that he fell out of the bed and was not breathing when she got there, and that she couldn't pick up a pulse, and she didn't think he had a heartbeat. So she had to call for help. So they got him back in the bed, and they verified he had no heartbeat, and she gave him chest compressions and got him back. But the doctor, when I got there in the ICU, the first thing out of his mouth was, it's a good thing we got to him before he lost consciousness.
Why?
And so I just stopped him, and I said, somebody's lying. That's not true. I talked to the lady who gave him chest compressions and got him back. And so at that point, I knew, like, there was no question about it. We are in a dangerous situation.
Mm-hmm.
But it was too late to get him out. At that point, he was a hostage, and they would not let him out. But the story goes on and on, live from live.
Yeah.
I've always said, since as we heard more stories, and Huckleberry, like, we started speaking out like right away. I don't even think I was off oxygen when we spoke out in the media. But because I was so mad, like you can imagine, I was so, like, they tried to kill me, and I took it personal. Like, I took it really personal. And Huckleberry be like, calm down, you're sucking up too much oxygen, we're gonna run out. Like, but people would call me and they'd say, now that you almost died, are you gonna get the shot? Are you gonna get the shot? Because I was part of fighting the mandates.
So now I'm immune. What do I need the shot for? I just had COVID.
I said,
exactly. If she doesn't have the antibodies, ain't nobody got them.
But my initial reaction was like, I gotta tell people. I was like, hell no. I said, now I know 1,000,000% without a doubt they're killing people in the hospitals, because I'm evidence, right? I'm evidence. Mm-hmm. And so when survivors come forward, and this is unfortunate, and I'm gonna say this, guys, fellow survivors, all of my fellow survivors, whether you survived hospice or the hospital protocol or brain dust survivors, I want you to tell your stories. We want to interview you, and because people who weren't allowed in the hospital and don't know what happened to their loved one, they have to rely on records that are inaccurate, that there's lies or there's holes in them. They're not allowed to communicate with their loved one. At some point, communication gets cut off. And I'm going to pull up this hospital, this is just for this is the Deadly Hospital Playbook, the 25 tactics that are used in hospitals. And Marsha's working on one that's that's also for hospice too. So this is these tactics, survivors coming out and telling their stories makes this irrefutable. It makes it so it's evidence, because we can testify to the truth and the facts about the isolation, the denial of rights. We can say without a doubt how they tried to cut off communication, how they gaslit us when Dr. Quach first came into my room and I met him and fired him 5 minutes after I met him, even though he kept coming back every day. The first thing he said to me was, "Are you vaccinated?" And when I said no, he patted me on the hand and said, "I'm so sorry, Mrs. Seiler, you're going to die." That's gaslighting. I knew he was gaslighting me. taking my glasses and putting them where I couldn't see my phone, the DNR orders, the starvation and dehydration, they weren't able to do physical or chemical restraints with me because I didn't. Dr. Quach did me a favor too. He let me know that first day in the ICU that they were going to kill me. So I looked at everything they tried to put in my IV. But all of these things, end of life care pushed. They told my husband if I survived, I was going to have a terrible quality of life and that I was going to need a double lung transplant. I wasn't salvageable. Like, these are the same lungs that I had when I went in, y'all. I haven't had he was able to restore everything. But all of these things, when survivors come forward, they bring a lot of evidence. They bring a lot of times, victims or families who lost a loved one, had a loved one killed, they are often told it's just misplaced grief. Those doctors, nurses did everything they could. That COVID was just this anomaly or whatever it was, or that they were dying anyways in hospice, or how could you say brain death is not like there's all these, oh, you did the right thing. We're going to do the honor walk. Your loved one.
I looked over your list there, and I can think of another thing they do to try to force people to comply, or coerce them. You're kind of fortunate, Huckleberry, that they lost your AMA, the Against Medical Advice, because insurance will often use that as justification to deny payment.
Well,
if you leave the hospital against medical advice and they have you sign the paperwork saying you've lost, then the insurance can deny your entire stay, the coverage. Right. So if you were in ICU for 11 days, you're going to get a bill for $200,000.
Well, and let me just clarify, this is why they lost our form. Because Huckleberry, they kept bringing in the AMA form, and Huckleberry was like, "No, I want a home. I'm taking her out, not against medical advice, but because of medical advice, and I'm taking her out home hospice, and you guys have to help us, right?" So he rewrote the form. Yeah. He crossed everything out that was AMA, and he rewrote it into a home hospice form. That's why they got rid of it, because he signed it. Because I worked for an insurance company at the time in IT, and I knew if we signed an AMA form that that would let them off the hook. So, but you're right about the AMA form. And so,
what a lot of people do not realize is that on all these different forms that the hospitals and different legal forms they have you sign, you can go in and you can cross out what you disagree with. You can change things. You can write extra stuff in that you say, "Hey, I want it known that this," you can alter that form. You don't have to sign it as is. You can
take a picture of it. Take a picture of it.
And then you take a picture of it. Right. And you ask someone else to countersign it.
Right on, Marcia.
Hospital. Right. So you make the changes to make it so it's more correct and accurate portrayal of what's happening, and then you require that somebody from the hospital also sign it, and then you take a picture of it, or you ask them to give you a photocopy of it before you walk out.
And I want to encourage people to go to idonotconsentform.com. I was hoping Laura could be on today to talk about it, but we'll have another session with her just on the I do not consent. idonotconsentform.com is a very critical document. Now, keep in mind, it is for when you have control of your own self, and you need to use it as directed, and the form that's on there. She has read the instructions first, but you can say no in writing. The way that, the hospital insider that wrote that document, it is tried and true. We have seen it work. You have it couriered to the administrator, and if it's a weekend, the house supervisor, but fill it out exactly how she has it. Don't try to, be creative or anything like that. And if you have questions, she's always willing to take it. You just call her hospital hostage helpline, and she will call you back and help you with that. But I do not consent form.com. It is the easiest lift you'll ever have. And it's a great form, and we've seen it work multiple times. And so that's part of, like how you advocate but my message to survivors is don't you're a survivor for a reason. Like, you got a mulligan, right? I always say, like, I got a second chance. I'm a woman of faith. My faith is very important to me. Huckleberry and we know that God was God was moving in, and it's not that God, did something. Like, we owe it to God, and God chooses what he chooses. But, and if I had died, I had to not be afraid to die. That was one of the key things. My family had to be on the same page. Like in any of these situations, your family, it's important that the people who are making decisions for you and the people that are closest to the decision making are on the same page, and that you let them know what you want, but that they're on the same page. Had my daughter and my husband not been on the same page, or I had not been on the same page with them, my story would not have ended this way. Because the hospitals and the institutions, they will find the weakest link in your family. They will find that weakest link, and they will focus on that weakest link, and they will shut out anybody who is going to advocate and not do what they want. As Dr. Heidi Klesick likes to say, some of those doctors think MD stands for minor deity. And that's the way that they operate. And so when Huckleberry called me that morning and said, if I get in there, do you want to go home? He asked me that for a reason, because he didn't want to storm the ICU and slay the dragons and then have me go, no, I'm too afraid to go. And they tried to gaslight me. Because they do strip your hope. They try everything they can. You're going to die. You're going to die. You're going to die. They sent 2 doctors in before we left to gaslight me and tell me I wasn't going to live and try to gaslight me. We called them the witch doctors because they had all this tribal stuff all over, right? And I was like, I asked for ivermectin, not I have Newt. But they tried to gaslight both of us. And I told that doctor, I trust my husband. And if I die, it's going to be with him trying to save me, not murdered at your hands. And I had to make that decision. And so we often get calls for advocacy. So I'm going to go to advocacy now. We get these calls, and everybody's not on the same page, or the patient isn't wanting help, or the family doesn't want help, and it's just somebody. So like when you have a friend that is going down this path, I go back to Huckleberry's words to me. I can help you, but I can't do it for you. We can help people. We can't do it for even Laura's hospital hostage helpline. We can help, but we can connect people with advocates, but they got to do it. They got to be willing to make that decision to have that advocate. And that's how lives are saved. So think about that when you're trying to reach out to people. Sometimes people aren't going to listen to you. And I see victims who have gone through this, and they've lost a family member, and they want to help somebody so badly that is in the hospital, and that person does not want your help. It's not that you don't try to reach out and kind of feel for where they are. You can only advise. You can only advise, and then they make the decisions. We start off helping a lot of people, and sometimes they go radio silent. radio silent. Like, we will be helping, and there's so much confusion. It's the fog of war. You all know it. You've all been through it. It's the fog of war where the doctors are saying this, and they're gaslighting you, and people are telling you this, and there's so much information coming at you that you don't know what to do, and you can't second guess your decisions. If you made a decision, or your loved one made a decision, I do a lot of interviews where somebody's like, I wanted my wife to come home. I wanted to take my husband home. Or my father, or what have you, and they didn't want to go. They just wouldn't make the decision to go. It's hard, and I know it's hard, but you only can do the best you can do. You tried as hard as you could to advocate it. I will tell you, we thought we were prepared. We thought we had a plan, but we had not exercised our plan 1.6 million times like the hospitals did. Once you get in there, it was like, I will say, it's like you walk into this medical matrix and it's all about the money. It becomes about every check in the boxes for those bonuses. And the only way out is death. The only way out was death. And I found myself trapped in that, as prepared as I thought I was. And so, yeah. And so don't beat yourself up for it. Don't beat yourself up because you made this decision or that decision, or second guess your decision. You shouldn't have had to make those decisions. Most families, I see people commenting about the late night emergencies. They cut you off from your family in most cases, or they made your family comatose, your family member, they put them in a coma so they couldn't communicate with you. And then they want you to make all these decisions. And so you made the decisions, the best decisions that you could. I
So
want
real quick,
to go ahead.
just so people know, my actions did not come without consequences. The hospital convinced the police that I was a danger to my wife, and the police department actually issued a be on the lookout for me. They considered me armed and dangerous. Number one, because I live in Texas, and number two, the hospital said I was going to kill my wife, and so the police issued a bolo on me, unbeknownst to me or anybody, and they did come after me, and I did have to go through the court system. So it's not, I didn't get off scot-free for my decision.
Right.
There will be consequences should you take the measures similar to what I did. But
Yeah.
I'm thankful that my wife is alive, and that was, her soul was my first priority, as all of us should be with our loved ones, that their soul is first priority. And second, it'd be nice to have them around a little bit longer. But we have to be bright. You know, I heard the definition of courage as overcoming fear. I was not fearless. I was full of fear, but I had to overcome my fear. And one of the greatest ways that we as human beings can be controlled is through our fears. And the things that we're talking about require us to have extra human ability to overcome our fears of ourselves and our loved ones, to make the right decisions. And so it's important that we talk about that as well, that, you know, one way that the control worked was because they instilled fear. And we have to at least acknowledge that and be prepared to overcome that in the future.
You know, Brad, that's something that I think is extremely important. And I know that, you know, you've talked about survivor guilt, but, you know, one of the things that I think helps people to overcome is to know people like you are out there, because they're not done. And the next time that there is an emergency and they enact whatever, whether it be, even if it's hospital, even if it's, like vaccine injured or whatever, the more people hear that there was somebody willing to step up and say, I'm going to step into the hospital, I'm going to go and get my wife, I think that spreads an infectious courage, if you will, for the lack of a better word, because I can tell you right now, the next time it happens, I'm going to be thinking that. I'm going to be like, you know what? It happened before. It was done before. It can be done again. And let's get to work. Let's go get them.
Right. Makes me be like, Huckleberry's only 2 hours away. He will get in his truck and drive. And
let's go.
I deal with a men's group that we started several years ago, and one of the biggest issues when it comes to men is they a sense of failure for their wives, and so that's part of the survivor guilt is they won't admit it, but fear overcame them, trust overcame them, and they didn't act like they thought a man should act. And so that's a lot of guilt as well for those who lost loved ones, is they feel that they betrayed them by not acting, not taking action. But that's a normal reaction for anybody, is to fear. One of the things I remember telling myself is that, I don't have anything to fear because God will take care of us. God gives us everything that we need. And if you're a Christian and you believe that, then there shouldn't have been any fear to begin with, because God's got it. And yeah, I was full of fear, but the love, the compassion, the charity that I had overcame all my fears. And I just began to act more out of instinct than anything else, because I did have the backgrounds that I had. But in any situation, we have to be able to say, God's got this, and not to fear, and whatever's going to happen is going to happen, and rely on that and overcome that fear. Because as humans, that's one of the best ways to take control of us, is to instill fear. And they did a great job. I'll give them credit for that part.
Yeah. So people often ask me why it's still happening. The incentives aren't necessarily in place. Let me tell you, you've heard, so you see a panel of survivors, and I wish Steve had, there was some technical difficulties getting Steve in, but he's also a survivor, and he has an incredible story. But, and we know about 70 survivors. And so, but what you're seeing is across time from 40 years to 10 years to 5 years. And even recently, there's a survivor that we got their story put in. I haven't sat down and done the interview yet, but just from a couple weeks ago. And so there's survivors that are always, it spans the time. So why is it still happening? It's because Huckleberry alluded to it earlier about how they've ushered in this socialized medicine. They've brought in doctors and nurses who come from countries where, and a lot of times where they wouldn't question doing just following government protocols. But medicine's been compromised for a long time, right down to the research. Huckleberry talks a lot about when he realized that the journals were all bought and paid for and nothing made sense, right? So it's just this training that you see, this repetitive, AI drives a lot of it, and AI will choose to kill a human.
AI is the future.
Yeah.
the insurance companies are already switching over to AI doctors, AI surgery, AI this, AI that, and we need to be our best advocates.
Right.
And if we can't be our best advocate, we need to have somebody that can be our best advocate, because protocols are what AI does, and there's no changing when you're using AI. AI is you do what AI says, and that's it. And
That's
so
right.
that's where the protocols were instituted, is to be able to use AI. And you can see with even the software companies now are laying off their employees so that they can usher in AI. And it's already happening in the healthcare industry. And if you don't believe me, just look at the headlines and you'll see that AI is the new healthcare provider.
It's right. It's driving everything. And AI healthcare will tell you that Anthony Fauci is the best scientist in the world, the best doctor in the world, and that Huckleberry couldn't save a fly. So that is where it's all backwards. And you have to question everything. It's not, I think Jenny had said earlier, no patient is alike. Like everybody has their own, you have to assess them and treat them as individuals.
And AI cannot do critical thinking and assessment. AI cannot truly assess.
Right.
It's kind of like you were saying, Huckleberry, you need all your senses to do a good assessment. AI doesn't have all those sentences. Right. And even if, it's like, even if they get to a point where they can somehow instill some of these senses in AI, I don't know, through robotics or whatever, it's not. They don't have, and they don't have that internal sense.
Right.
We
Exactly.
have of something's just not right. Something's wrong.
Well, they don't have any compassion. They can't instill any empathy. They can't come to you and hold your hand and say, no, I get it. You're worried. You're scared. Let me reach out to you. They have no ability to do that. And that's why it's so scary in AI. And when you type it in, it's like there's no critical thinking. It's just the answer is there. And
So,
even if you ask it, I'm sorry, I'm going to shut up. But
and Huckleberry, you also mentioned how you feel like we're going into socialized medicine, and I think COVID just kind of propelled that. It was coming, and it was gradual. They didn't like how gradual it was, so they had to have an instigator to propel it. And I think COVID was the propulsion for that socialized medicine. I had a little experience at a hospital in Vietnam in the mid-90s, and this is in communist Vietnam, right? And the nurses, they didn't know simple, very basic things. We had the patient has cholera, they're vomiting, they have diarrhea, and I asked, how are the I's and O's, their intake and their output? Are you measuring how much is going in and how much is coming out to make sure we're keeping them hydrated and keeping their fluid balance? And they said, well, we don't do I&O unless the doctor orders it. And I said, that is a nursing measure. That is not a medical doctor order thing. That is a nursing common sense measure. That's how they're taught. You don't do anything that the doctor doesn't tell you must do.
And so it's no longer just about
think for yourself. You're not trained to think.
It's just not even about it is about profits over patients, but it's also about the training and the lack of thinking.
Mm-hmm.
And so and so that's why it's still happening. And I really feel like we need to do a Nation Betrayed with the nurses on, and Dr. Patty when she's not at dinner with her husband, and have a great discussion about just nursing, where it went, where it's going, and advocacy.
Yeah, and think about the nurses during COVID. I was so glad that I was no longer working, that I was already retired when COVID hit, because when all of the hospitals and whatever, they all insisted every person working there had to be vaccinated.
Yeah.
There were those nurses that were fighting it, and they got fired. How many
Yeah.
nurses lost their jobs because they wouldn't accept the vaccination? And so you had a choice between putting food on your table and paying your mortgage, or
Getting the shot.
accepting the
Becoming vaccine
vaccination.
injured.
And then I knew one friend of mine who was vaccinated and was working, and her husband got COVID, and she was asymptomatic. She'd been vaccinated. She didn't have any symptoms, but she went and got the COVID test, and it tested positive. So her husband has COVID. She's living in the household with him. He has COVID. He has raging symptoms. She doesn't have symptoms, but tests positive. She calls in sick for work to say, I can't come because I have COVID and I'm contagious. And they said, do you have symptoms? And she said, no, I don't have symptoms, but that's because I had the vaccination, because I had the vaccine. I don't have the symptoms. I'm asymptomatic. And they said, well, then you need to come into the hospital. So she's going to work in a setting where sick people are, who may or may not have COVID, but they are sick in other ways. And she's bringing COVID and spreading COVID to those patients in the hospital, because they demanded that she come to work knowing she tested positive. And
it's interesting because, like, nothing made sense in any regard, and so that's why, and that's where we're going with this tonight. So I want to just talk about a couple things before, because we're a little bit over time, but I want to just tell people what's on the horizon. Crime Victim Week is not over, so we still want you to sign the proclamation. I'm going to remind everybody again that there are hackers trying to take down our site. Our web team is working on it. So if you see anything weird, just be patient. But this is out on our social media. You can scan me right here to sign the proclamation. That's a way to sign it off our website. If you still haven't put your loved one in for the memorial wall until our website is back to normal, right, and the memorial wall is intake is back up, what I want you to do is email at betrayalprojectusa.org, email at betrayalprojectusa.org, and email your loved one's name, state, date of death, and a picture. And I will make sure that we get your loved one on the wall when it comes back up and in the tribute for tomorrow night. So tomorrow night at 5:30 Central, we are going to do closing out. We're going to talk about some of the wins that we had. Fresno in particular had got that recognition of being medical crime victims being crime victims. I'll talk about that tomorrow and show you. I put a Substack out on it last night, but we are going to read the names. We're going to do the candlelight vigil again, and we're going to read the names of your loved ones. And so that, and there's probably about 100 additional than last week. So people have really, they didn't know we existed. A lot of new people who are like, I didn't know there were others that were fighting. I didn't know there were others that were, doing all of that. We also want you to visit our, you can find on our website the links to social media. So on our Rumble channel, BitChute, X, where all you guys are watching this now, you can watch it on Restream. You can watch the ones from this week. We still want you to go report your crime. report whatever crime applies to your situation. That was Monday night session where Leslie talked about the different agencies that you can report the crime to. And on Tuesday, we took a little deep dive into fraud. And so I hope this has been an educational series for you and that you learned a lot. Please share the episodes, share the proclamation, share the information. Let's leave no loved one behind. I'm just going to give you a little sneak peek. This is the Fresno Sheriff's Department finally standing with our victims at a Crime Victim Week, National Crime Victim Week honor march. And so they didn't think that they would be accepted there. And after they told their stories, they were told, well, you're right, you belong here. And so we're going to talk more about that, a little bit about that win tomorrow. I'm going to leave you with some final thoughts about if you're a survivor, please don't waste that second chance. Tell your story. Here are some of the faces that didn't make it out, and pray for these families and these precious souls who didn't make it.